All right, everybody, we are here today with Craig. How do you know my ex DiLouie? Which, when you write a book called My Ex the Antichrist, I'm sure you're going to hear that joke a lot.
It's a
Uh,
conversation
but
starter.
I do have one question before we get started here. So far, I've had on Ian Rogers, I've had on Craig Davidson, also known as Nick Cutter, and now you. I mean, you guys are supposed to be the nice country. What is all the horror authors doing up there in Canada?
I used to say that about England. Back in the early noughties, I kept reading British books, horror books, and I was like, man, there's something in the water over there. But they really know what they're doing. It's not just the usual. But no, there's a nice little renaissance going on in Canada and America. I mean, I'm from the States. I grew up in New Jersey, lived in New York City before I moved here about 20 years ago. So horror may live in my bones because of the United States, but otherwise, I'd say there's a great renaissance going on in horror across the board.
Perfect, perfect. So the question I always love to start out with every author, at least one that hasn't been on before, what is your supervillain origin story?
Sure. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up on a farm outside this tiny little Andy Griffith town that was across the river from this really groovy, weirdo, witchy, gay, like everything you can imagine, town called New Hope. And so I would say, where'd you grow up? Lambertville, New Jersey. And like nobody knows what I'm talking about. The next question you ask someone in New Jersey is, what exit is that? And then they off the highway that runs through the state. And then I say, oh, it's right across the river from New Hope. And like everybody knows New Hope because it's such a crazy little tourist town. So this was my growing up on this farm in the middle of nowhere. And, my high school was 500 kids, grades 7 through 12. Our graduating class was 80. So there were only a couple of us weirdo nerds who didn't fit in. And I was always reaching in my imagination because there was a lot of boredom and a lot of other things going on at home and in the area, that I just really found it appealing to reach into my imagination. And I was looking for spirit guides in that respect, and found my first one in Robert E. Howard. And Robert E. Howard was a pulp writer in the 30s, and went through kind of he was rediscovered in a way, or never. He was always celebrated in the fantasy community. And I read every single thing that guy wrote. And he inspired me to, and of course, at my age, I was 13-year-old boy, like the purple prose, the lurid descriptions, the violence, the damsel in distress. It was like all great wish fulfillment for a kid my age. And so I really got into the whole idea of, I not only wanted to enter those worlds, but I wanted to create my own for other people. And some of my friends were doing that with Dungeons and Dragons at the time. I was one of those, wargamer. But I was like, no, I want something a little more permanent, and I want everyone to enjoy it, not just a small group of my friends. So that got me into writing. And I did that whole, you know, Colson Whitehead said it best. You read and read to find out what kind of writer you want to be, and then you write and write to find out what kind of writer you are. And we all go through this phase where we're trying to be our favorite authors. So I had a Chuck Palahniuk phase, I had a Robert E. Howard phase, I had a Stephen King phase, and before I finally found my own voice. But all through high school, wrote a lot of um, starts to novels when I wasn't like doing basic coding on my VIC 20 and all those things nerds do. And then through my 90s, eventually sort of cut my teeth enough. I kind of knew what I was doing. And in 2001, this weird little Chuck Palahniuk phase novel came out, Paranoia, about conspiracy theories. And that kind of like, it did well for a small press title. And I stayed with that publisher for a couple more books and ended up just about to give it up. My daughter was born. I was like, I work at home. I was working at home and have ever since, in doing education in the lighting industry and journalism, which is kind of where I came from in the States. I was an editor of a lighting design magazine. And I was like, every hour I put into that, I get $1. So what am I doing with throwing away all my labor on this fiction that does never seems to go anywhere. It feels like I'm in a Kafka novel where I have this gold invitation to join a party I'm not allowed in, and it's maddening for a new writer trying to break into Big Five. But I had this crazy idea for a zombie novel, and came out at the right place at the right time, which is what success in fiction is. Right place at the right time. Walking Dead was just coming out. This book exploded. I ended up with Permuted Press. I did 2 more zombie books. That got me they did so well, that got me an agent. The agent got me into Simon and Schuster with a vampire novel called Suffer the Children, which was it. It proved the adage: if you want a deal bad enough, you get a bad deal. I took it. It was a really bad deal, but publishing's a long game. I treated it that way, and it got me in the door. And that book still sells really well 10 years later. And that got me, I got a different agent. They got me into Orbit, which is one of the major imprints of Hachette, one of the biggest publishers in the English language publishers in the world, based in New York. And I've been a stable horror writer with them ever since. And so I've done, I think My Ex, the Antichrist is my 7th book with them. And then there's 2 more coming out next year, a duology. And then I'm hoping to keep it going even further. And just, it's a dream come true. So I'm just happy to be in the game and writing for them, and making it happen.
No, it's nice. I was laughing a little bit because I recognize that quote that you said. It's also in your book about if you want to deal bad enough. I'm like, I recognize that.
That's my friend AJ Glazer. I shout out to him for
Yeah.
sharing that one with me back in the day. But it stuck with
I'm
me.
not
It's a
gonna
good one.
jump into the book right away because I never do, but yeah,
Yep.
Malcolm was a fun character. All right.
Ah,
I've got 2 more questions before I get into the book, and I have to say this is probably one of the hardest ones I've had where I wanna get to the book questions, but I'm trying to stick to my my
okay.
schedule here. Other question I always love to ask an author, for those aspiring authors out there, what if there's any piece of advice you had to give or any piece of advice that you were given that really stands out to you being an author, the whole thing, it doesn't just have to be writing, it's the whole. I mean, I know authors, you guys are marketers, you're editors yourself to an extent, all that good stuff. What would you tell them?
Well, I get asked a lot, like, if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, right? And my answer is always like, I would say nothing, because the younger me knew everything, and you couldn't tell me anything. I had to learn the hard way. I had to get wisdom the hard way, and wisdom being, as Aristotle defined it, knowing how much you don't know about something. And which is funny, because I actually got success in publishing before I think I really knew what I was doing with those zombie books. It was only after that I really applied diligent study and really leveled up, and really learned it inside and out. But one thing I would tell my younger self, or telling young people today, new writers getting in, is don't don't get hung up on the imposter syndrome. A lot of writers come in and they're like I thought I couldn't go to. I lived in New York and I couldn't go to the book fair. I was like, I don't belong there, and I'm not in the business yet. I'm going to earn it first. And no, I was stupid. I should have just gone, and I could have walked out with a wheelbarrow full of books, by the way. Um, and it's the same thing with like events like StokerCon, which I go to as much as I can, and any other type of writing conference. Go to it. You'll make some of the best friends you've ever had as an adult. You'll you'll learn things during those weird conversations that are taking place outside the panels and seminars. You'll have drinks with people, and just really just get into somebody's head and find out about their journey. You'll every one of those conversations is like watching one of these interviews. But you're the interviewer, and you're also being interviewed. It's really terrific experience, and that networking helped me get both my agents. That networking helped me get a lot of blurbs for my books, and just have these friendships that I really, really treasure. People whose work I just love their work, and I just really admire them as people. And it's inspiring. it's as good as meeting a reader, a fan who loves your stuff, and that just gives you energy for a whole month. They think you made their day, but it's the other way around. They give you the energy to keep going, and it's the same thing with these authors. So that's one thing I would say. Um, don't do the imposter syndrome. So don't go in overselling yourself, and don't go in there thinking you don't belong. Just be yourself and talk to people and be honest about who you are and what you want and why you're there. And you'll find a lot of older authors. I mean, you do get the snobs, I guess, sometimes, but most of them are just very welcoming. There's people and they're very welcoming. I would say the same thing to readers. Like if you like someone's work, um, go ahead and reach out to them, and you'll make their day, and they'll make yours, because your favorite author will write to you and gushing back at you, saying like, "I'm so happy you wrote to me." The other thing I would say is I learned that I would love new writers to learn is the basic of craft involved with planning ahead. This was one of the most important things I've ever learned, because you think of a book in 3 acts. The first act's really easy to write because you're doing all the building. Last act's fairly easy to write because it's all the action and the climax. And then you have that no man's land and saggy middle. Like, what am I going to do with this? I don't know. I'm supposed to constantly up the stakes and tension. So like maybe I'll do Michael Crichton and I'll have my characters captured and escape 5 times in a row. It's just, it feels like there's so much filler. And then you have talking heads where you have these characters, doing this for chapter after chapter. And with just exposition, and there's nothing's being moved forward. And it's painful. It's really painful. And you're like, oh, thank God I got to 60,000 words. I can write, get back into start ramping to the climax. So with planning ahead, and I use John Truby, his fantastic book, Anatomy of Story. I think every writer should have it. I use him as my Bible, and he kind of lays out. It's written for script writers, but it's really for storytellers. So I've gotten so much value out of it. But it really just lays out step by step, like a roadmap. How to think of your character. The major plot points. You don't have to outline every single thing. Same thing with the character arc. You have a character with a flaw or misbelief they need to change. Here's how the change is tested. Here's that change has a conflict with what they want. And then you have theme. And there were so many of these things. I like, back in the day when I know what I was doing, I was like, characters, I'm just like, I need to know what kind of ice cream my character likes. I'm gonna do a D&D character sheet. I'm gonna roll dice and say, well, I don't know. But instead of just really knowing what makes this person tick, because if you know what their misbelief is and how they need to change and what their external goal is and how that's in conflict with the internal need, you'll know how they take their coffee. All these things will just be evident because this character inside and out. And you're not writing 40,000 words and going, oh yeah, I finally figured out my character. Now I have to go back. You know your character from the beginning. You know your story's heartbeat from the beginning. You know your themes from the beginning. So many writers, and I used to do this, like, I wrote a book. Now, what was the theme? Like, just know the theme before you start writing it. And then you internalize these things. And then, you'll find you're not going to have those problems in the middle act. And really 4 acts, the middle 2 acts. You're going to, after the first plot point, then the midpoint, and up to the second plot point, you will find that the Zen saying it writes itself. It kind of will. And it won't be as painful. So I would say, yeah, that isn't the way to write. People write any way they want. I don't care. Whatever makes you happy, you're an artist, go for it. But if you want to be efficient and write commercial fiction quickly, on the principle that you can't get published if you don't have product, and you need to keep writing. There's this prejudice in fiction that writers are born, not made, and which is completely wrong. I mean, we can be born with certain talents, but we don't look at a violinist who picks up a violin for the first time and we don't say like, oh, that person sucks. We say that person's just learning the violin. And it's the same thing with writing. You have to allow yourself to get better, like, which is a nice thing, because on that staircase always you're not as good as the writer you're going to be next year, but you're better than the writer than you were last year. And the more books you write, the more your brain actually develops the way they've done MRI studies of athletes, and they find their brains are like perfectly tuned to their sport. They found the same thing with writers, professional writers. Your brain will eventually adapt. The neural pathways will write themselves to make you better and better and better and better and better at telling story. And the way to do that is efficiency. Write, always be writing, write as much as possible, get it out there, then trust to the X factor of luck to see what happens with it. But every time you do that writing, you will, and have that faith, you will get better at what you're doing, and closer to achieving what I would assume to be your dream.
Perfect. And I love how many things you've already said that I also recognize from the book. It's like you wrote a lot of these little comments you're making in the book itself.
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder how autobiographical Malcolm is for you, to be honest with you, but we're not getting into that quite yet. One last question before we get into the book. What does a day in the life of Craig DiLouie look like?
First of all, I should just say I'm an extremely lucky man. I'm not Stephen King, but I'm a stable writer. I mid-lister. I'm living a dream that I had since I was 9 years old, which is to see my name on a spine in a bookstore. And I get to go on living that dream. And I get to work at home to do it in my pajamas. So I commute to the coffee maker every morning. I can, if my kids are sick, I can pick them up from school. I spend about a third of my day on my lighting clients, doing journalism. And then I spend the rest of the day doing fiction and doing. So I feel like in a way I'm semi-retired, because even though it's professional, I'm getting paid to do my hobby. So I get to do my hobby most of the day. So it's just really just a very, very blessed person, whose journey to get here kind of looks like someone falling up the stairs. Like, it's really hard to describe how I did it. But it's just putting myself out there, constantly producing, and luck. Just took me here, took me there, took me here, this took me there. One thing leads to another. But otherwise, while I'm writing my day, I live with my partner, Chris Mars, and she's a horror writer as well. She writes short stories. She's working on her first novels. And so she's down in her office, she's doing her thing. I'm doing my thing. And for me, I wish I was cool like Stephen King, and I'd be blasting Metallica, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, my head's, like, I'm just so scary today. Just it's the most boring thing in the world. Like, I'm sitting there, you can hear the clock ticking, it has to be absolute dead silence, and I'm doing this for hours. I haven't peed in like 4 hours. I'm just, my feet are up on the chair, and I'm da, 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 da. But in my head, all hell's breaking loose. But just, it looks like someone having a fit, while it's happening. If you were to watch me do it, and you would eventually fall asleep, because it's not very exciting to watch. But that's what I would call a typical, day in the life.
So I get to ask you a question I don't get to ask too often, because
Sure.
rarely do I get somebody on here who's also married to a writer.
Ah,
I think Elizabeth Bear is probably the only one that I knew for sure because she's married to Scott Lynch. Uh, does being married to another writer help or hinder? Just, everyday life, having somebody who they understand what you're going through, but you're also dealing with a person who does the same thing you do. It's kind of like, working, you don't want to work with your spouse necessarily sometimes.
I mean, I like it. I think she does too. It's how we met. We met at a StokerCon and dated quasi long distance until she decided to move to Calgary, and we ended up living together. But yeah, I mean, it's it's nice. We get each other, and we can always talk shop. I like how she's such a wonderful sounding board. So I can say, like, I'm kind of stuck here, and I have this choice, and then she'll talk me through it. And whenever you talk something through with another writer, either they'll help you or they'll help you help yourself. It'll just pop into your head like, oh yeah, I know what it is now because I've talked it out. Um, my ex, my ex-wife, not a book's not about her. I had to explain this. Where is it? I had to, yeah, she wasn't a big reader, and so it was very different.
Mhm.
So I personally like it. So I can't speak for Chris. I think she likes it too. Um, but we do have very different processes. Uh, so we're very different writers, but I really value her opinion, and I think I personally find it just great.
Nice, nice. So let's get a little bit into, and actually, I know it's over my shoulder, but so people can see it a little bit more close up. My Ex, the Antichrist. This is actually my first book from you, and I want to say a couple things real quick about this. One, I had looked at the title, and I'm a sucker for one that's got that sort of like any sort of religious context is. And so I was kind of, I'm thinking kind of Exorcist type thing when I picked this book up, and I got the arc. This book comes out, I think it'll be Tuesday, but yeah.
Yes.
So by the time I post this for everybody who's watching, it'll come out tomorrow. But anyhow, I digress. Um, so it wasn't that, but it wasn't that in possibly, the best way possible. I don't usually like comps. In fact, I usually hate comps because somebody will say this book's like that book, and you read it and you're like, what are they talking about? What I will say that is that if anybody has read this book, this other book that I'm going to mention, this gave me very much Wilding Hall vibes. I don't know if you've read that book by Elizabeth Hand.
No.
Um, it's not just because it's about musicians, and it's not just because it's otherworldly, for lack of a better term, because they're other than that part, they go in completely different directions. The only other thing I would say is the same as they've got that reporter after the fact thing going for them, but just the vibe of it, I thought was very similar, and I have to say Walden Hall is one of my favorite books ever, so I enjoyed the heck out of reading this book. What made you decide, and again, I'm only joking, I know you have an ex, but what made you decide to write this type of a story, this, and I'm gonna say this to cover the bases, I love the fact that this book obviously talks on very religious topics, but I also feel like it handled them well. Yes, there are some religious people that are very much, I don't wanna say caricatures, they're very extreme, but they're also they're brought across by you as extreme. It's like, yeah, this is not your average priest, this is
Yes.
not your average, friar.
Mhm.
They're a little out there, but what made you
And they're
decide.
fighting the Antichrist, so they're committed.
Yeah. But what made you decide is like, "This is where I'm gonna go next with my next book. I'm gonna take the Antichrist and I'm gonna go f and I'm gonna make him, a 20 something, musician."
Oh yeah. Well, I guess I'll tell. Let me just back up and just log line the book real quick
Sure.
for people who are not familiar with it. So My Ex the Antichrist is as Edward said, is publishing on July 1st. It'll be available pretty much everywhere because it's published by Hachette. So it'll be in bookstores, libraries, online retailers, and so on. It's published on their Run for It imprint, which is their new horror imprint. And in this novel, the lead singer and the other members of this pop punk band, the Shivers, finally tell all about how they saved the world against the Antichrist. And so, as was said, it's written in epistolary format, so it's kind of like an MTV's Behind the Music, like a Rolling Stone interview, where these people are being separately interviewed, and then all their statements about common events are put in into this order, into the same place, so you can see what happens. And of course, there's all these delicious things that happen with that. There's some people remember things differently, and they have comments about each other and the behavior, and so there's a lot of potential for Everyone's an untrustworthy narrator to an extent, and there's a lot of potential for an undercurrent of comedy with the horror, and horror being and comedy being kissing cousins. That's makes it a lot of fun. But this novel started off with honestly, as the I wanted to do, I thought it'd be interesting to do something on the Antichrist, and this title popped into my head out of nowhere. It's just, and I was like, that's that's really cool. I like that title. There's a story there, and so I thought, okay, well, I need to. Uh, what would that look like? Well, a young woman trying to find her voice. She comes from a religious background which was oppressive to her, and tried to speak for her and tried to live for her and tried to regulate her, and but she loves music and she loves the freedom of that, and she wants to do that, and ends up meeting Drake, who enables all of this, but he's more like, instead of iron handcuffs, it's more like velvet handcuffs. It's a different kind of oppression. And he's the Antichrist, so he's a bit of a narcissist. He's just finding out who he is. Our protagonist Lily's just finding out who he is as well, while she's also finding out who she is and trying to discover her own voice. So the band breaks up. She finds a way to keep things going. He's now in a band, and there's a battle of bands coming up. So, um, and so that is kind of like the story as I conceived it. And then there's so much more in there. The setting is in the late 90s because, there was the Y2K bug. Nostradamus said the King of Terror is coming in 1999. It was like the world's going to end. And there was a lot of hysteria around that, the millennial fever. And I wanted to tap into that. I also like the idea of the band being a pop punk band, because if you're gonna fight the Antichrist in a regional battle of the bands with the fate of the world at stakes, it's got to be pop punk. I actually come from an earlier era, the punk era, and the pop punk in my day was like the Ramones, back in the 80s. But 90 pop punk did this big heyday, and like people are so, even today, are so passionate about it. The people who grew up in that era. I just thought it was, and it's such like this happy lyrics and irreverence and like screw the rules, I'm never growing up. I just thought that was just the perfect musical form for this. And then set it in Bethlehem, PA. So the Antichrist will be born in Bethlehem, and it's Bethlehem, PA, and it's this dying. At the time, it was a decaying steel town. Um, U.S. Steel was pulling out and shrinking, and the town was suffering for it. And so I just thought that was just great backdrop to these kids, wanting to make something, all from all different backgrounds. Drake goes to them almost like they're disciples. Follow me and discover yourself, and maybe the worst version of himself in Drake's plan, but they end up joining this band for all these different reasons, and end up, Lily ends up freeing them in a whole different way to pursue their dream. But yeah, so that was sort of like all the different things that went into it. And then there was the whole epistolary aspect, like, why would I do this as an interview? um it was painful. Like, it's hard. I'd written a novel before How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. I wrote this novel called Episode 13, which is probably my best-selling horror book. And it was epistolary, and I was pitching it to my editor, and I was like, I love the house within a house trope. I was like, there's a ghost hunting TV show, and they go into a haunted house and don't come out. What happened to them? And he's like, I need something more. And I'm like, my editor loves found footage horror. I'm like, I'm gonna write this as a found footage horror book, epistolary. And he was like, sold. So then I was like, oh, yay, I did it. And then I was like, oh, what have I done? Because now I don't even like epistolary. So I had to find a way to do it in a way I liked writing it, and I hoped people would like reading it. So the problem with epistolary is you have this wonderful feeling of being a fly on the wall, but there's no intimacy. So I came up with this idea of journal entries from the people in the house. And so so you would have this horrible thing happen almost, and you're a fly on the wall through, like, you're reading a video script or something. And then there are the journal entries where people are reacting to the horrible thing that happened. So you can get in their heads. So with My Ex the Antichrist, I came up with this idea of this rock interview. So 20 years after the fact, Lily has confessed to murder. She's been in jail, and now she's finally willing to tell all. And the other members step forward and say, "We'll tell. If she's doing it, we'll do it." And now, so it's almost like you're reading this nonfiction crime thriller where this terrible thing happened. No one knows why. What happened? Okay, now we're finally going to find out the truth, and it just worked out great. But when you're doing epistolary like that, you just want to bird walk. You want it to feel real, so you just start talking and talking and talking, like writing, and you really have to kind of rein it in and find that efficiency. And then the last thing about the book I just wanted to have fun with was, what if the Antichrist was real? I wanted it to feel lived in. I wanted the Antichrist to be a real person. What would that look like? And how do I make that feel lived in? And then how do I explore the themes of, like, all right, God sent his son to die and redeem the world of sin, but now he's sending the Antichrist to destroy it, and everybody's going to suffer, and then but it's going to be happy and everything's going to be great. But like, why are we doing all this? Like, I just wanted to ask questions like that. Like, if God was right in front of me, I'd be like, okay, but why are like, why are you doing that, or why are you doing this? Um, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you please explain this? And hopefully get a better answer than Job in the Old Testament, when God said, "I'm God, so there's your answer. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to explain myself to you." But I wish he would, and I would love to hear it. So I tried to kind of like answer these questions, or like at least explore them in the book, which I think adds a lot of fun to it, because these are people facing the apocalypse, and there are people saying, "Yay, God's coming," but they're saying, "Oh my God, everyone's going to die horribly." And so there's this whole question of, like, does humanity get a say in this game between God and the devil?
See, you are Malcolm. A lot of the stuff you're saying is all stuff Malcolm said.
That part, yeah, that part of Malcolm is a lot of me. Yeah, for absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
So I'm gonna yell at you for one thing, and it's tongue in cheek. But when I first picked up this book, and of course, sometimes a title might allude to something. It may not be that's what the title actually is. So I pop this open, and the first thing I see is the author's note. I'm like, I'll read the author's note, no biggie. And I start to read it, and I'm like, wait a second, because I'm thinking that author's note is Craig DiLouie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did I miss a story somewhere? And this is about some crazy person or something like that. And then I finally realized, no, that's the author's note of the book that is the Antichrist,
Right.
the person who's writing that.
Yes. It's supposed to be, it's epistolary. It's supposed to be a
Yes. Yeah.
nonfiction book. So I wrote that author's note, like, why did I write this book? And it's, you think it's me, but I'm
Right.
not. I wasn't in my. I wasn't
It's
21
the
in the late
journalist who's
90s.
writing.
I
And the
was. I
first thing
was.
I actually stopped is like, and then
Yeah,
it did not help. I
I
tried to look
created
up,
an
it's like,
author, and I, that is sort of my alter. I don't know, alter ego. I don't know what you would call it. Proxy.
well, I
And
tried looking up a band, The Shivers, and there is one, but they're much newer, so it's not it's not
yeah,
not the one back in the '90s.
no,
I did love a lot of your references though too, because I was born in the '70s, so a lot of that '90s stuff I lived through as well. I remembered a lot of those bands you mentioned and other stuff going on, so that was kind of cool. Uh, I do have to say, because anybody who's listening to what you said about this book, I feel like if you picture this as like somebody did a movie, you might have in your head that this is going to be like, musicians, the Antichrist, it sounds very B-list movie, but as a book, your writing, your prose, the way that you uh, put it together, and you're already being interviewed, so you can't run away now because I'm not saying this to get you on here. Uh, I absolutely loved it. It flows a lot more than the description of it sounds. It is much better than the sum of its parts. The characters, each of them different, each of them have their own views on what's happening. Even the fact that they're all in a band, none of them have the same background. but just the way that you wrote it, everybody's got their own voice, and I just loved it. That this is the part where I'm just gushing about it, so if anybody sees this, pick up the book, it's totally worth it. No question actually involved in that. But now let's get into Lily. What made you that character, you made her the front. Obviously, she's the we know this, she's the girlfriend of the Antichrist. It's called My Ex the Antichrist, we know that. But what made you decide that her character, such an innocent character, was gonna be that main focus for you, and also be the one at the end of the thing? Like I said, she's in jail for murder.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your kind words. As a writer, I don't know how to take a compliment, so I'm just going to say thank you. Leave it
No
there.
compliments or no thanks needed. Just go ahead.
Thank you so much. And the yeah, as far as Lily goes, yeah, I mean, she's the main event. She's the title of the book. She's the person who uh, that kind of rallies everyone to resist the Antichrist. And I, I honestly, when I was first writing, I had a hard time getting a handle on her. I knew what I wanted her to be, but she was adding up to a collection of characteristics rather than a person. And when I dug back into it, I was like, so I started reordering things. I really went to town. And I'm not a huge reviser until my editor says something, but I went up to town on it, and really found out who she was, and was able to write it. So like, I just like this idea that you have someone who's growing up in this what she considers an oppressive household that's very religious, and everyone's telling her what to do, what to wear, who her friends can be, what kind of career path she can be on, and she just wants to make music. She's a good person. She doesn't want to rebel to like say, "Oh, I want to break every commandment." It's like, no, I'm a teenager. I want to make music and do what I love. And so Drake is her ticket to that, and they form this band together. But then she finds out how controlling he is, even though he's all about freedom. It's his version of it, and she has to always be free and always do what isn't expected and break the rules. And she wants to be a good person who wants to be free to do what she wants to do. So, and she's also sort of like in the beginning of the book, she's sort of the wallflower, and she's making things happen, but it's very quiet. It's very, sticky. She's kind of bringing people together. And so over the book, you get to see her find her own voice and like, sing and make music and live her dream and resist this divine plan and the end of the world and the Antichrist and everything that it means. Um, not just as a force of resistance, as a positive force for this is us, this is humanity speaking, this is what we want. And so I just love that. I just thought it was so hard to crack that nut, but once I did it, she just opened up and became the best character in the book for me. But that being said, it's really an ensemble. The other band members are all very distinct, as you say, and as far as it being cinematic, um, anybody who's an audiobook listener, it's a real feast because it's a cast instead of a single narrator, and they do such a wonderful job with this. And there's some music in the book, and it's really cool. It really comes alive. Um, but those other characters are super interesting. Drake himself is interesting as the Antichrist. He's imagine, imagine being Jesus and you find out, oh, I have this responsibility. I'm going to die. I'm the Son of God. I'm going to die. I'm going to, but it's going to redeem sin, and I am actually, part God is in me, and all this other things, whatever doctrine you ascribe to. But now imagine the burden of that, right? In the garden, he's like, please take this cup from my lips. I don't want to, this is hard. I don't want to do this. This is scary. But then he obeys. At the Antichrist, now you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm going to destroy the world. I get to run it for a while, but my contradictions are going to end up causing chaos and destruction, and then God's going to obliterate everything, all reality. I mean that's pretty heavy too, you know. And for this being that is all about freedom and resistance and fighting the rules, it's very restrictive, right? I have to play my part. I have to be in the script. I have to fight for freedom because that is what I have been told to do. That is what I have to do. I have no choice. Or does it? And so there's all these really interesting questions when you look at cosmology. Uh, it's all these very simple statements, and there's something I think for the religious that scratches this itch, like yes, right and wrong, black and white, this and that. But for a guy like me, I look at all the grays and I'm like, well, what about? But this doesn't make sense. What that doesn't? What about this? And in fiction, you could really explore it, and it just makes it really fun. So the truth of the book is, hey, some of these things don't make sense, but guess what? Too bad they're happening. But I get to have the characters play with them and analyze them. Like Malcolm's an example of that, and the other characters are trying to find themselves and trying to find, does life have any meaning if the world's going to end? Like they're doing their own thing as well. So it's just a ton of fun across the board for all the characters. With Lily, of course, being the standout.
Two questions. One's going to be easy. Did you name her Lily just so that you could do the Lilith nickname from Drake?
Yes, that, and Lily of the Field, is attributed with innocence, and yeah. So the short answer is, but it can be Lilith. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the fact. I think you made a lot of references that either a religious scholar or, let's face it, a horror reader are the
Yeah,
only ones that might recognize, Gog and Magog.
yeah.
Not the average romance reader is going to have any idea who those are.
Right, right.
The other thing I loved, we would hate her as a person, but I loved her as a character. When did you know that you were going to have to, or you were going to include the, shall we say, Catholic Church spin doctor representative that's part of the interview? I think her name was
Oh,
Carolyn or
yeah. Well,
Catherine or something.
yeah. Well, one of the great things about epistolary is you can kind of throw little curveballs to, and so almost like in fiction, it's called an internal cliffhanger.
Mm.
So he opened the door, and something bad's beyond it. The character opened the door, and then it breaks in the middle of the chapter to something else, and you have to wait. So they do this in TV all the time, internal cliffhanger. So with epistolary, you can do these internal cliffhangers, but then introduce somebody out of nowhere, like, or something that's a slightly left field, so juxtaposed with Lily describing how she's falling in love with Drake, and how he's freeing her, and how she's discovering herself as a musician, and then discovering that there are all these really weird things about him. They're interspliced with that are these interviews with this religious studies professor, who gives all this background on the Antichrist. So it seems to come out of nowhere, but then it's like it all makes sense. And then it's the same thing with the PR person for the Catholic Church, who just kind of like is giving what you would expect the Catholic Church to say, like, because officially the Catholic Church doesn't know there's this rogue group of priests who are trying to kill the Antichrist. So they're giving the answers they would give. And it just adds this little epistolary flavor, just like it's realistic, it feels lived in, it feels like the author actually went out and interviewed all these people, and it's an interesting perspective. And so there were a lot of things accomplished with that. Um, and some of the other characters who were sort of come in from the sidelines.
Yeah, well, I love them, and you mentioned the professor as well, Doctor.
Yeah,
What's his
Woodward.
face?
Yeah,
But I love the fact that you could have those because they fit perfectly in what would be an interview,
yeah,
and they could bring the reader up to speed on something they may not know or ask the questions that you wouldn't expect a 20-something. I mean,
right.
they're older by the end of the book, but or by the time the interview's happening,
Yeah,
but not the questions that you would expect from a drummer growing up on the street,
Right,
that's it.
right, right.
So I love them as that ability because this is all dialogue. I love that you included them. I was just wondering if they were early in your process, or if you're like, I need somebody to come in here so I can explain this, but I still have to have it in this
Yeah.
epistolary format.
They were set up early in the process, but they were going to be later, and I put them sooner when I was reworking Lily. And they made this wonderful juxtaposition to this young woman who's describing how she's outgrowing this oppressive, this loving but uh, very oppressive childhood with all these rules about who her friends can be and what she can do with her time and what kind of career she's going to have. They want her to be an accountant. She wants to be a musician. Um, and now juxtaposed with that are while she's going through all this, falling in love, you see like this religious professor and this spokesperson for the Catholic Church talking about what the Antichrist is and how people see the Antichrist. A lot of what Americans, what they think they know about the Antichrist is from the Omen. So they think, oh, you need the daggers of Megiddo, but it was made up for the movie. But people actually confuse theology with that movie. So I wanted to kind of give like some background on who the Antichrist is without it being this sort of like exposition dump somewhere. So I had these experts come in and just give little snippets of other cultures have the Antichrist, or like these are different definitions of people. This is what the Antichrist is believed to be. It's not any one thing. And then the Catholic Church comes in and says, well, this is how we've always looked at the Antichrist. And it just makes this wonderful added layer to that chapter with all this flavor, with these little bits of exposition about something that's actually really cool. Religious wise, which is the history and theology of the Antichrist. And then those characters can come in later for other things to add little asides. Like, this is interesting, like, from a religious perspective, and they would say why. Or the Catholic uh, spokesperson would say, we don't know anything about that church that blew up, or this other horrible thing that happened. Nothing, we don't, these are conspiracy theories. We have nothing to do with that.
We don't know why he
Um,
was carrying around a claymore.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. He had a rocket launcher. I have no idea why. So that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I love that because again, they could have that type of conversation that it wouldn't be believable if Eric and Ramona were having that conversation.
Right. 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 Exactly.
Oh, okay.
And the
Now
epistolary
with
format
Scarlet's
opens it up to that opportunity. Like you know, so Dr. Woodward shows up, and the reader's like, I don't understand why this guy's here. It's like, oh no, okay, oh, I see what we're doing. No, absolutely, yep,
so again, I'm trying to avoid. Now I'm trying to think. There's certain questions. Is like no, because I want the reader to find out naturally. So I don't want to ask you about certain things in the book. So having said that, oh, one thing I will also mention. I love the fact that in this book there's sex happens in the book. We know that, but we don't have to read it. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
uh, violence happens in the book. Somebody might lose their head, but we don't have to listen to all the viscera and
right,
you talk about the awful and all that other good stuff. Uh, I mean, it's mentions like, oh, I got blood on me, but that's as far as we went. So I love
right.
the fact because you've still written this horror book without it being what I know this is dorky, but I like to call it gore book, where
Mhm.
it's just trying to gross you out. This is all about the mental aspect. And yes, it's got that religious background, but I think most of the good, what I would consider religious type horror stories, is way more intelligence and mental than it is let's gross out the reader.
Yeah. Well, I've religion is something that has always fascinated me. Theology,
Mhm.
and in my novel, The Children of Red Peak, I took it on head on. It's about these children who they're the sole survivors of a doomsday cult that commits mass suicide. So it's years later, and they cut these kids are now grown up, and they come together, and um, they want to figure out like what exactly happened that last night, because some weird stuff happened besides the mass suicide. Uh, so that novel was directly inspired by a reaction I had. I've always had to certain parts stories in the Bible, like Abraham being asked to sacrifice his foreskin, for example. So this is self-mutilation. And then the second thing is Abraham was asked to kill his own kid, and Abraham was like, okay, I'm gonna stab my own child like a goat, like it was a goat, and I'm gonna kill and burn the body so the smoke rises and pleases God. This and I found that terrifying. And then, you know, also the whole idea of the New Testament, which is, if you can be punished eternally for finite crimes. So you live this life, and you could live like 10 years of your life, but you did a sin, and you're too bad. You're going to hell. You're going to suffer forever. Like that. That's scary. That's really scary. And there's this gigantic, omnipotent being looking at me right now that decided this, and is going to hurt me. I mean, but maybe I can appease it, and try and appease it, but it knows my heart, so I have to really be convinced I'm sorry, and I'm appeasing it, and I know I love you more than I love anything, and I would sacrifice my own children for you, and I would mutilate my own body for you. And the Children of Red Peak is about this cult, but the beliefs they have are not are literal. They're literal extensions of the cosmic horror found, I think, in all religion, and all popular monotheism anyway. So yeah, definitely. That there's religious horror is not just the devil scary. It's that the whole thing's kind of scary if you think about it too much.
Yeah. All right. So one more question about the book, because again, I think
Sure.
we've talked about a lot of. I don't want to do any spoilers, but you said there's going to be an audiobook. You said it's a cast.
Yes.
Knowing that there's lyrics in the book, and
Yes.
knowing that there's very much music, did you come up with any, sir? I mean, I don't know what your background is. Did you have somebody else do the whole music thing? Because I'm assuming these readers, these voice actors, are having to maybe sing some of the parts.
Yeah, it's tricky. Some of the singing was going to happen, and then it was going to be like a DVD extra kind of thing. The whole song
Mhm.
that Lily sings at Armageddon, which is the Battle of the Bands. But there were some just like union things, and like some rules that applied, that I don't know if the singing is going to end up in the
Okay.
in the final audio book. And I hope I didn't get in trouble, anybody or me in trouble, saying sharing that. But that is basically what's happening there. But the lyrics I wrote, and then and with pop punk, you can write, you can write bad lyrics. I mean, I like to think that they're good pop punk lyrics, but with pop punk, it's like it's not Shakespeare. It's a simple sentiment, well said. It's like that's what you're doing there. And in her case, it really works. The song that she sings. Um, but otherwise, the music that's in the book is like, I went to music loops and found one that kind of fit what I had in my head, and I was singing in the shower while I was writing this thing. And then they had a guy, and the guy wrote the instrumental, and performed it, and that is going to be in the book, the instrumental. So that yeah, so it's sort of like it's a group effort. But yeah, there is a little bit of music
Oh, I mean, I'm
on
sure I
that.
could find out Tuesday, but I was just curious of, like, is that the
Yeah.
voice actors, if they're just saying the lines in the book, or if they actually had to sing the lines, like they were actually singing it.
Yeah, the singing is it was a bit of an issue, but yeah, there will some of the lyrics will be spoken word. Always were like going to be spoken word, and
Yeah.
that's yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right. Is there
Yeah, we
anything?
didn't want to go all out on a full production of like
Right.
making songs, because then someone like, I like the book, but I hated that song. I mean, we just didn't we just wanted people to use their imagination.
Yeah.
But give a little bit of that music flavor to it. So it's more like seasoning and accents than a main course for the book. Let's put it that way.
And well, I was just also trying to imagine, it's like you got some poor voice actor there, and then it's like, and now you've got to, scream these lyrics. Wait,
You'd
what?
be surprised. I've done this before. Episode 13, I had this hippie song, and I wanted to use "Reach Out in the Darkness." I can't remember what that song's called. Maybe it's called "Reach Out in the Darkness." I think it's so groovy now. People are finally getting together, that song. And that's the creepy, it plays in the basement and the wafts up to that haunted house. And um, the hippie researchers the scientists who lived in the house and disappeared, is it them? And I was like, trying to get rights to songs, man, it's
Yes.
such a hassle. So I just made my own. And they had somebody actually for that one. Somebody did sing it, and she did a great, really great job. And as a DVD extra, you can hear me suck singing on a PowerPoint
Mm.
over the track. Just singing badly, but singing just what it would sound like. And then, of course, that narrator is like, "Oh, I get to sing too. That's fun," and just ripped. It was like let her rip, and she did such a great job with it.
Yeah, but I get that though too, because I tried to get the rights for a song because it fit perfectly with a book review that I was doing one time, and I just kinda
Yep,
wanted to have it in the background.
yep,
And I reached out to the people who owned the rights,
yep,
and I got the email that said, "Well, let me talk to somebody." And
yep.
that's the only email I ever got. They
Yeah,
don't
and if you try and go through a broker, there are brokers who do this, and
Yeah,
they're wonderful because you can find so many songs and you can get the rights to them. But they assume you're going to use it for a TV show.
yeah.
I just want to like quote one line in a book, a couple lines in a
Mm,
book, or use a little bit of music on an audiobook. Like they're like, give me 5 grand, give me 10 grand. Like they don't
right.
you're below the radar for them,
Yeah.
these brokers, and they don't want to deal with it. They're like, five
N not
grand,
doing a
that's it.
Super Bowl ad commercial here.
Yep. Yep. So
Um,
I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna make my own. I'll just refer to these songs and these bands, but I'm just not gonna, substantially quote them, use their stuff.
well, like I said, this is my first book that I read by you, and it's already made me wanna read some more stuff. You said you got a duology coming out next year, possibly.
Yes.
Anything you can tell us about that yet? Noah's a
Oh
perfect
yeah.
acceptable.
It's a slasher duology. It it's called it was originally called The Deputy and the Sheriff, but the publisher's like, let's go for it here. And the first book is called The Summer Fun Massacre, and the second book is called The Yule Day Slaughter. And it's basically about a uh, the first book is about a summer camp called Summer Fun, and there's Friday the 13th, all those movies, summer camp slasher movies. It basically happens, and the deputy shows up, and the deputy is the deputy trope. He is not completely bright. He's a little bit bumbling. He arrives too late, and the sheriff he works for didn't believe the kids, and this is why everyone died. But he does get there in time to save the final girl, and and the rest of the novel is basically his story of redemption. He wants to catch the killer, not knowing that it's a supernatural killer right under his nose in a way, but he refuses to believe that. So he just takes the entire book trying to find a killer, and then discovers, he ends up finding the truth. In the second book, he becomes sheriff, and he ends up pursuing the killer, that he knows who it is, what it is now. Um, so the first book is like summer camp slasher, all the tropes, and the second book is more like survival horror, The Fog. We made this, we did this sin. Town did a sin 100 years ago, and now it's going to pay for it. Like, it's that kind of thing. Um, but so it takes all these tropes that kind of themselves don't make sense, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to make them all make sense. I'm going to take this story very seriously. Every single summer camp trope is in this summer camp slasher novel, and it's inverted, so it's told after the fact, but through the deputy's point of view. But I'm going to make every single, like, that you shoot the killer in the head, it falls down, but then it gets up. Why is Michael Myers standing up? He was shot in the head. Like, I'm making all that make sense, or at least I'm giving it an explanation. And so I just think it's going to be such a fun series. It's just a duology. It's 2 books. Um, One is coming out, I think, around July, and the other is going to come out in November, closer to the Christmas.
Gotcha.
And I think just people are just going to have a ton of fun with it. I think people are going to recognize all the tropes from the classic slashers, but they're going to be like, I, but they're going to see all those tropes explained and used in a very natural way, and that these stories are going to culminate in something that has its own identity and something that you didn't need to know all that stuff to enjoy. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward.
So if we see a couple of kids go off to have sex, we're pretty sure they're gonna get stabbed. Got it. All right. All the
Yes.
tropes are covered.
Yep.
All right. What, if anything, are you reading right now?
Well, uh, part of the problem with having a brain that's now hyper wired to writing is I'm always reading stuff related to what I'm writing next. So I also do some military fiction. So I'm right, and I'm contributing to this shared world collection, um, and it's a World War I flyer. So I'm reading books of World War I aviation, how the engine, like how the planes worked, how they were maintained, how did they shoot through the propeller, like what was it like to go up there and it's free, you're freezing to death up there, and so I'm reading. I will, I just did a book about a crew of a B-17 bomber. This was a one-off World War II novel. And my World War II stuff has its own fan base, and it's actually pretty popular. And I read like 30 books on B-17, the B-17, and how they worked, and memoirs of guys who went up in the B-17s to write this one novel. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I used to be such an eclectic reader, and I don't get to read as much for fun anymore. It's more for work. But I have read a book recently, that I just thought was absolutely amazing. And it's an older book. It's called Wounds by Nathan Ballingrud. And it's short stories. And I'm not even a big short story fan, but I'm more novel guy, but it was just absolutely terrific. Rena Mason, Chris, my partner, Chris's friend and a colleague of ours, turned us onto it. And I was familiar with his North American lake monsters, which I was like, I'm not sure that's my cup of tea either. But I read Wounds, and man, it was just all these reimaginings of hell and like some of this mythology around hell, but it teases you with it, dribs and drabs with each story. So it takes you a while to get the whole picture. Just chef's kiss as a writer. Just thought it was absolutely terrific. And then I went back and read, all his other stuff. I read North American Lake Monsters and his new novellas. Um, just hats off to that guy. And I read his book, The Strange, which is a sci-fi novel, kind of a weird sci-fi novel. The guy just keeps piling on the weird, and just what an imagination. Just right up my alley. Really liked it.
Nice. Perfect. All right. Couple more. One, if you do you have a hobby, activity, accomplishment, something that you'd like to talk to people about once in a while other than writing?
Well, I write book reviews and movie reviews and TV reviews. It's a really valuable part of the day. Is Chris and I, in bed, we'll have a laptop and we'll watch our show, like, or our movie for an hour, and then we'll play some word games together. But yeah, so I'm like, I'm reading I'm watching all this stuff. I might as well review it on Facebook and try and make the internet a slightly better place. So I've started doing that. But then the world got so crappy that I kind of lost heart a little bit doing it. So I'm hoping I'm going to get back into it. But I've been taking a break. But other than that, the main thing, I guess, people that I could talk about till the cows come home. I obviously I'm a talker. I can talk about writing till the cows come home. But would be being a dad. Like my sense of purpose, the wonder and the joy and the love. And I have a 17-year-old who just graduated high school, so I'm just like, oh my god, the kid's almost 18, and I was just like, I've actually
Mhm.
raised a human being to 18 and alive and healthy and ready to take on the world themselves, Lily style. And yeah, so I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, mine are the mid-20s, I get it. It's like,
Yeah.
how can you love somebody and wanna strangle them at the same time? But I think my wife already knows that answer. So anyhow, that's off topic.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
All right, 2 more real quick. One, is there anything we did not talk about that you want to talk about?
Absolutely not. We covered a lot of bases today. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
And then the last one, I love my brick and mortars. I know you're up there in Canada. Shout out to a brick and mortar bookstore that you love. Anyone will do.
My top bookstore on the bloody planet is Barnes and Noble in Union Square in New York City, where I when I lived there, I was fortunate to make many trips. I lived in the East Village, and I would made many trips across Union Square to go into the Barnes and Noble. They have a real horror section, even before it was cool to have a real horror section, and they just are an amazing store. Like every time I go to New York, I make a beeline for there. It's sort of my mecca. And otherwise, in Calgary, I would love to give a shout out. I mean, I love my chapters, which are my big box stores. Although I wish they would sell more books and fewer blankets, um, and mugs and stuff. I want them to sell books, do books, and but they're great stores. And then we have some great local stores. My local store is Owl's Nest, and I have a great relationship with them. They come to I don't have a book launch. I have like a house party, and so I invite the local writing community, and we all come and have some drinks and some food and a lot of laughs. I don't bore people with a reading. I just say, "Here's the book. Owl's Nest is here. Please buy it, and I'll sign it for you." And we sell a lot of books and have a lot of fun. And so they're a great store. They're just so supportive of local writing community. And if anybody's here in Calgary, Alberta, you should go to Owl's Nest for sure.
Gotcha. All right. And when I post this, I'll have links down in the description. So shout out to them. Love giving the shout out to the bookstores.
Yeah,
Think that is pretty much it. Like I said, you are now on my list of I need to get more books by this author. So I appreciate that. Shout out to Orbit for getting me the copy so I could read it beforehand so that I would be
yeah.
ready for this. Absolutely
Great
love it. I'll
publishers.
also be doing
So
the
great to work
for
with.
it. And I just want to thank you for taking out your time, and also thank your lovely partner Chris for giving you up for the afternoon so we could do this. Appreciate it. And I think that is it. All right. Thank you very much, Craig.
Yes, so thank you, and I wanted to thank all your readers who've joined us for this. You're still with us. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.